So modern history is sort of normally taken starting in 1500. It's quite useful in the Middle East for that, because that's when the first great Shia dynasty was founded in Iran. What you had up to that point was, as I say, the Shias were largely underground. But in about 1500, you had a victory by a particular Shia Muslim group in Iran, who founded a great dynasty, which essentially has lasted ever since, up until, indirectly, the Shah was deposed by Khomeini. And so you got, for the first time, a kind of Shiite superpower appearing in Iran. And they're terribly proud of this. And I do wish that the West learned a bit more about Iranian history and Shiism, because it's a far richer and intellectually fascinating tradition than people realize about. And they produced some very, very profound thinkers. A chap called Mullah Sadra, who was an ontologist and an existentialist long before Sartre, and talked about the beingness of God, and wrote very, very sophisticated philosophical treatises. There was also a school in Iranian Shiism called the Illuminationist School, which was essentially about the need for each one of us to cultivate our own enlightenment, and how God wants us to do that, and is sending us wisdom teachers to enable us to do that all the time. And it's produced writings over centuries which are anything as profound as anything the West has ever produced. You know, they were studying Plato, Aristotle. They were trying to reconcile them. They had all the great Western thinkers translated, and they were reconciling it with the innermost meaning of the Qur'an. What the Shias believe is that the Qur'an has many levels of interpretation, and that Ali, because he'd been there when most of these things were revealed, he knew what they actually meant. So he passed on to his sons and their descendants, who were the 12 Imams, the actual meaning of the verses, which to a non-initiate are kind of gobbledygook. You know, what's this? The heavens are going to quake and the world will be gobbled up like by fire. You know, what does this mean? If you take it literally, it's like a medieval nightmare, the Quran. It's full of people being burned and, you know, gobbled up by fire and stuff. If you take it metaphysically, as the Shias say, it's about the states that we encounter on the spiritual journey, the different stations that we reach on the journey towards enlightenment. So, anyway, in the Shia tradition, there's that Illuminationist school, which is still going in Iran today. You know, we could be having this talk in downtown Tehran, and people would say, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I study that." And so there's a very profound philosophical heritage in Iranian Shiism, which I think needs to be reconciled and appreciated when it comes to the blanket condemnation of Iran's role in modern history. Anyway, I can't do it justice in the time we have. Simultaneously, we have an Ottoman Empire being founded in Turkey, which was a Sunni empire, but also reached a very high level of intellectual culture. And you had the promotion of the sciences, of exact knowledge, of... The one thing the Sunnis are good at is a very, very detailed scholarly study of the hadith and of the sayings of Muhammad, and the chains, the sila as they're called, of information. And therefore they develop things like biographical dictionaries, and a great love of dictionaries, and you know, people's lives and their studies really mattered to the Sunni tradition. So in Baghdad, before the 12th century, there were enormous numbers of bookshops and learned people. They acquired paper from China, and they started producing books. The first paper factories in Europe were made in Cordoba. They regarded themselves as the people of the book. And you know, Sunni scholars are unbelievably exact and loving of their creative intellectual work. And Baghdad was a great centre for that. Unfortunately, in the 1200s, it was conquered, sacked and destroyed by the Mongols, which was one of the catastrophes of history. And a lot of the books went up in flames. And the Mongols were just like barbarians in comparison. And so they then had to flee. A lot of that knowledge had to flee to the hills. But when the Ottomans founded their empire, it became a haven for some of this knowledge. And in the great schools of the Ottoman Empire, it again reached a very high level of sophistication. So, interpretations of the Quran, an understanding of Sufism, and we had Rumi turning up in Anatolia, founding his whirling dervishes. And I've just been to Konya, his tomb, which is there, and I've bought lots of wonderful things. It's a book by his teacher, Shamsi Tabrizi, who was the initiator of Rumi. And he was someone who'd mastered theological sciences. His father was a learned Sunni theologian, Rumi's father, who had to flee the Mongols, essentially, and they had to flee the chaos of Central Asia, so they ended up in Anatolia, were given refuge by the prince of the city. And apparently when the father turned up, he had something like 20 camels stuffed with books, because when a scholar moved about, they had all these great camel loads of books. And Rumi inherited all that love of learning, but then he said, no, you have to go further, you have to go deeper. You have to take all the books and then go even deeper into the innermost meanings. And that's still a flourishing thing in the Ottoman Empire and then in modern Turkey. Also you had Haji Bektash, who was from Anatolia, who was someone who tried to reconcile Christianity and Islam. And he was a scholar, mystic, Sufi, who founded the Bektashi order, which I think is probably more intellectual than Rumi's. And was more influential behind the scenes in the Ottoman Empire itself. And so the Turks today are descendants of that and inheritors of that wisdom tradition lineage within Islam, which is why they're appalled by the dogmatism of the extreme ISIL types who are interpreting from a very strict Wahhabi perspective, which from a Turkish perspective is antediluvian. The Wahhabi ISIL people are stuck in some ancient pre-medieval fantasy interpretation of Islam. Islam is not about beheading people, it's not about acting in an unchivalrous way, it's not about the horrors that they're doing in Syria and Iraq. On the contrary, chivalry developed inside early Islam. The idea of chivalrous behaviour on the battlefield was central to Islam. There's a wonderful story that is always worth repeating, which is factual, of when Ali was in a battle in the thick of the fighting, and he was fighting this huge opponent who dropped his sword. Ali managed to get it out of his hand. And then Ali sheathed his sword and said, well, you better pick it up then. And the guy couldn't believe him and said, what are you doing? You could kill me. I've dropped my sword. You've won. And Ali said, no, we're not allowed to kill an unarmed man. It's against Islam. Pick your sword up. And the chap said, what do you mean against Islam? What are you talking, bonkers or something? If you dropped your sword, I'd stab you immediately. And Ali said, yeah, but that's the difference between us. You see, I'm surrendered to God, which is what Islam means. I'm not your enemy at all. You're also a child of God. We're actually long-lost best friends, but you've forgotten it. You don't know that. And I'm just waiting for you to remember that and stop attacking me. I'm only defending myself because you keep coming at me, and I'm entitled to defend myself. But really, I would much rather make peace with you and be friends and make friends with God together. And we can all live happily ever after. Anyway, the guy, when he said all that, he said, well, I refuse to fight anymore. And he said, I'm not picking my sword up. Tell me more about what this Islam thing is, because it sounds quite interesting. And in fact, the guy then left the battlefield and eventually became a Muslim. That's authentic Islam, right? Approach to fighting. It's about self-defense. You're not supposed to attack innocents. So what these so-called Muslims are doing is completely anathema to authentic Islam. Anyway, so the Ottoman Empire, fascinating history, and its intellectual complexity and sophistication was very interesting. They gave shelter and haven to the Jews when they were kicked out of Spain. So this whole Jewish versus Muslim thing, which has developed, is ridiculous from a long-term perspective. The Jews were actually welcomed back to Palestine, given settlement places, by the Ottomans because they protected the Jewish people. The Ottomans had a very sophisticated system. They gave protected status to the Christians and the Jews and let them run their own affairs because they were people of the book and, equivalent others. And so they flourished within the Ottoman system, and often top officials were either Christian or even Jewish. Simultaneously, we have in Europe the intellectual renaissance of European culture and the Aufklärung in Germany, the rise of the university, and it was the return of Aristotle's texts by scholars from Spain and Sicily that made possible our university system. And that was only done because the Muslim scholars had translated Aristotle, and it was retranslated into Latin, which gave birth to the kind of birth of the university in the West. And then from that first Renaissance, the High Renaissance develops, and it becomes a time in Germany, the recovery of Oriental studies was important. It's interesting that Goethe was reading a copy of the Quran, and he wrote this wonderful poems called the East-West Divan, which is one of the classics of German literature, about Oriental and Western, comparing the two. And of course, the Jewish mind flourished in Europe and was part of that Enlightenment, if you want. Kant, Hegel, the German intellectual tradition was flourishing alongside a rebirth of Jewish studies in Germany. And later people like Gershom Scholem and Martin Buber and Freud and so on are part of this, and Marx. Okay, they're part of this German Jewish Enlightenment, which is going on parallel to the Christian one. And I think what happened in Europe after the 30 Years' War, the civil wars between Protestant and Catholic, is when the Enlightenment came. Philosophers like Leibniz and Descartes and others. Basically, Europe said to itself, we don't want to go on fighting over religious differences anymore. I don't care if you're a Catholic or a Protestant. I'm no longer going to kill you. We had that early moment when we realised that it's surrender to truth that's the important thing. And so Leibniz, for instance, he worked sometimes for Protestants, sometimes for Catholics. Descartes did the same. Sometimes he was in Sweden with the Protestant monarchs, sometimes in France with Catholics, And so the high European Enlightenment created a place where we can bury these religious wars, and we can discover something called science, scientific method, or advanced scholarship, which gives us space and intellectual freedom to not have to fight each other because of intellectual differences. Now, in a sense, the tragedy was it was too successful. Because Europe's discovery of science and technology, our Enlightenment led to overseas expansion and colonialism. So North America is explored. You get a kind of North American Enlightenment, people like Jefferson, but also Thoreau and Emerson, who reached the same place. It's very interesting. If you look at Emerson and these American transcendentalists, you'll see they're saying exactly the same as the Iranian mystics with their Illuminationist school. Everything in American New Thought, New Age thinking, they think they're so clever, was actually discovered in Iran about 1,000 years previously. So I think it's really paradoxical. The Americans are kind of threatening to bomb Iran, It's like, or rather the Israeli Prime Minister is trying to persuade them to get involved in bombing Iran. What I would rather is that they make peace through the sharing of their highest intellectual wisdom. Okay. So, okay, Britain, we go to India, which also has a very advanced intellectual tradition of Islam. In India, in the Mughal dynasty, you had Akbar, who was his own kind of illuminationist school going on. I've just got back from India. There's a library I went to in Patna, which was an amazing Muslim guy in 19th century India, who gathered and collected manuscripts from all over India, Islamic manuscripts in Arabic and originals. He spent a personal fortune on it, just as a private book collector. Lord Curzon, who was the then Governor-General of India, personally was a friend of his and went and opened this library, which is now open to the public. It's called the Khoda Bakhsh Library. And I spent some time in there. And what's really interesting is, when Cordoba was sacked, and the great library of Cordoba was burned, some of the books managed to get all the way to India, and they've ended up in the Khoda Bakhsh Library. Refugees from the destruction of the Cordoba Library. So Indian Muslims were highly intellectual, and they actually embraced, in many ways, the British presence to some extent, because they admired our literature, our science, they were interested in British philosophy, and there was a strange kind of symbiosis happened in India, which is symbolised to me by Curzon opening this library in Patna. And at its best, this is when the British were kicked out, obviously it led to the split between Pakistan and India. Pakistan's Sir Muhammad Iqbal, who was the intellectual genius behind Pakistan, was one of these Cambridge-educated Indian British intellectuals who didn't want to revert India back to kind of proto-Hinduism. But what's sad, I think, about what's happened in contemporary Pakistan is a much more simplistic Islam has taken stranglehold with the Taliban, which is much more unsophisticated and violent. So part of my peace policy, as I'm going to come on and explain in a little minute, is through education to re-educate people in their own intellectual richness, in their own heritage. Now in the Middle East, basically gradually the British Empire replaced parts of the Ottoman Empire. We took over Egypt in the late 19th century and Cyprus. And this was really essentially to guarantee the passage through to India. And then World War I broke out. And from the Middle East perspective, I would say World War I was a catastrophe. It sees the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, which had preserved the peace between all these disparate regions, and their replacement by these artificially created nation states. So Syria, Jordan, what becomes Palestine and eventually Israel, Iraq. These are all made out of the what had once been the Ottoman Empire. And unfortunately, it was as a result of violence and warfare. The British, as you know, did an alliance with the Arabian tribes, with Lawrence of Arabia, which was able to break the power of the Ottomans. But what we didn't realise was we were making an alliance with a very primitive and unsophisticated form of Islam, namely the Wahhabi religion. Now, the Wahhabi religion was followed by a few tribes in the middle of Saudi Arabia, and it was to Ottoman or Shia Islam's sophistication as a Bible Belt snake-wielding Appalachian chap would be to a Harvard-educated professor of theology. There was just no comparison. The Wahhabis believed in the Quran literally. Every word is the literal concretization of the word of God. All Muhammad did was channel it. There's nothing that Muhammad in there. It's all directly from God. And every word has to be interpreted literally. All the hadith, all the toughest, most cruel, most vicious hadith, and they always seem to go for the most vicious, have to be enacted literally. So if you've got a choice between cutting a hand off or giving them 6 months of prison, you cut the hand off. It's a draconian, brutal interpretation of Islamic law, which is actually heretical. From mainstream Orthodox Islam, Wahhabism is actually a heresy because of its over-literalization and its draconian punishments and so on. Ibn Wahhab himself, if you study his history, it's very interesting. He lived at the end of the 18th century, just at the time when the High Enlightenment was kicking off in Britain and Europe, when Adam Smith was teaching in Glasgow and Kant in Königsberg. We have Ibn Wahhab going around throwing stones at women who've been accused of adultery without trial, and killing them to death and throwing the stones happily. He's also cutting down trees because they were appreciated and liked by some of the Arabian people. They loved their trees. And he said this was paganism, and therefore the trees had to go. So, and so it became a sort of, okay, what we have to reckon and realise is that just as if the narrative that I've sketched of the ancient goddess wisdom traditions from this region is true, as I believe it is, and there are holders of that lineage and that wisdom throughout history who've known that and shared that, we also have to recognise there are also people who fight against that and who want to suppress it and block it, and who will therefore oppose that narrative, and just as they did, in the very, very earliest times. Okay, And why they do it, medically, I think I've explained in this little book called Sophiophobia. They're afraid of wisdom. Why? Because it leads to loss of ego. The kind of people that oppose the wisdom traditions and the goddess traditions, on the whole, have very big egos. They're concerned with my status, my power, my blah, 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 right? And Sophia demands that you surrender to nothingness, ultimately, which is everythingness. They're afraid of women because women tend to, make one dissolve one's ego, shall we say. Anyway, I think if you want to psychoanalyze people like Ibn Wahhab, then I think we need some therapists to get on the job. We need people to do this. It's pioneering stuff. And you will find there's a lot of people out there need a lot of therapy. Now, the people in Syria and Iraq doing the beheadings and everything, they're direct intellectual descendants of Ibn Wahhab. They're utterly, opposed to the possibility of wisdom being anywhere other than in their own very narrowly defined dogmatic interpretation of one religion. With the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, Britain then takes over the mandate of Palestine, and we try and do an impossible balancing act, trying to be fair to Jews that want to resettle there because we've made a Balfour Declaration, and also trying to be fair to the indigenous Palestinians and Arabs. And we don't manage to get the balance right, and I think that's why we karmically have to be involved in trying to get the peace balance, finally. Also, in the development of anti-Semitism in the 30s and 20s and the rise of Nazism in Europe, there was an unholy alliance done, which is part of the problem we've got. Revealed in a book called The Genealogy of Evil by David Patterson. He talks about the founding of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and how these guys, which is the kind of intellectual ancestor of Al-Qaeda and ISIL, they believed in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a propagandist tract that said the Jews are in league with the devil in a world conspiracy to take over civilization and must be stopped, must be wiped out. And that was Hitler's secret reading at night. It was actually a forged text, scholarship has produced evidence for, written by order of the Russian secret police, the Okhrana, under the Tsarist epoch, who were very anti-Semitic themselves, and therefore were trying to create this false bogeyman to justify their pogroms. Because in order to do extreme anti-Semitic pogroms to kill Jews, you have to say they're devil worshippers. You have to whip up the peasants to hate them. Not only that, but the other thing was, of course, the old medieval canon, which is that the Jews capture Christian babies and turn them into, do sacrifices and then eat them. Turn them into, baby sacrifices. And there are videos I've seen on the internet now being produced in the Middle East still stating that. The Muslim extremists who go and volunteer for ISIL and things, they still literally believe the Jews are in a world conspiracy in league with Satan, and they're still capturing and killing Christian babies and eating them, and they're so-called intellectuals, whatever you want to say, the Muslim Brotherhood lot, and the people behind ISIL and so on, are stuck, therefore, in this very medievalist world conspiracy ideology. And so, where do we go from there? That's the problem that faces us. How to unpick all that. That's what I'm going to address in the next part. Okay, so, we're dealing with the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks and Western invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, and conflicts over the nuclearization of Israel and now perhaps Iran. So there's some, and now the rise of ISIS, and what should Britain be doing? What kind of peace policy can we be developing? That's the question I want to look at in this session. And I founded this thing called the Centre for Peace Policy Research, which is based here in Scotland in Castle and Muses. And let me give one of those out to you. So this notion of peace policy is new. I've coined it because I'm upset that we have a shortage of language to describe what I'm trying to talk about here. We talk about foreign policy in academic discourse. We talk about defence policy. We talk about security policy. And there's huge think tanks, huge industries. Millions of pounds are spent on think tanks in Washington, in London, in Paris on defence policy, strategic studies policy and intelligence policy. Nobody's talking about a peace policy. Now, I take the view that if we want peace to come back to this region of the Middle East, we have to think about a peace policy. It's common sense. I mean, all the sophisticated metaphysics amounts to the central thing that we create the kind of reality we focus on. So if we want a peaceful Middle East, we have to start thinking about what it would look like and, how would it be shaped. And people recognise Britain and America are brilliant at fighting wars. We attacked Iraq, we invaded it, and we conquered it in a few days. But we could not win the peace because nobody had ever thought about the peace. Right? We don't even have the language to describe what we would want. We just assume you go in, you conquer, you get victory, and then that's it. Well, what do you do? That's no longer acceptable for the kind of sophisticated world that we want to live in now. So, Centre for Peace Policy Research, the question we're asking is how can we find a viable and practical peace policy to enable the fastest possible transition to peace in the Middle East? Okay, so I've thought of a number of strategies, some of which I'm doing, some of which I'd like to see done, and some of which, we need to do together. The first thing is, okay, let's have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. It worked in South Africa, so why can't we take the same model and then get people from all these different countries and the subsections within the different countries talking to each other? So I set up in 2008 this project, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. But it needs more engagement, it needs more official support from countries, and it's just at the moment a kind of ghost of what it should be if we were going to flesh it out and make it more successful. There are problems with it, like when I went to Israel and Palestine initially to bring the first meetings together, It's very hard for Israelis and Palestinians to actually be in the same room, because if you're Palestinian, you're not allowed into large parts of Israel. You're not allowed into Jerusalem. And if you're Israeli, there's probably large parts of Palestine you won't go to. So it became a logistical problem where to hold the meetings. And in fact, what I eventually did was I had to go to them and interview them one-to-one with a camera, which I recorded. It was impossible to bring them all together into the same meeting space. And this is going to be a problem wherever I thought initially we'd take the next meeting of the TRC would go to Lebanon, then one would go to Iraq, one would go to Syria. It's hard to know where to begin. And anyway, I still think it's a very important project, and I think it should be supported by, Western, foreign officers. But at a distance, I don't think it should be. They can help with the funding and airfares and facilitation and logistics, but they can keep their hands off the direction of it in terms of policy. Thank you very much. Okay, the UK. What are we doing? We voted to keep the UK together. Scotland wanted to go its own way. We decided not to do that. But what I really admired about the Scottish Independence Campaign was its insistence on peace as being a very important part of Scottish policy. So what I'm saying is, okay, let's make that peace policy absolutely central to UK policy. I'm giving the UK about 5 years. If they don't get their act together and deliver on a genuine peace policy, then I think we should revisit the idea of Scotland becoming independent, because I think it had potential in it. But I think we should give the UK time to get its act together. One thing it can do is set up a Ministry of Peace Building. Peace will never be taken seriously by the UK government, or any government, unless we actually have it at ministerial level and representation on the cabinet. They have it in Sweden and Norway, ministers of disarmament and so on, and they have at different times. In the USA right now, some Democratic Congress people have put a bill before Congress to set up a US Ministry of Peace Building. It's on the internet, you can look it up. It's brilliant. I've been campaigning for the last 20 years that we do the same thing in Britain. And it would have an attached institute, and it would have a percentage of the military budget each year from the UK military budget. They're just hassling over, should we give 2% because NATO wanted? Well, fine. No, we'll give 1.98% because 0.02% is going to the Ministry of Peace Building. You dovetail them together so that as the military budget grows, so does the peace building budget. And there should be out-and-out rivalry. The Ministry of Peace Building should be trying to prevent wars because it's much cheaper. The big economics argument here is it's much cheaper to prevent the wars than to fight and win them. It's cheaper for everybody, apart from possibly the creators of armaments. The only people that will lose out will be the arms industry. So, we have to rethink jobs for the British arms industry, which is a big sector of employment in Scotland, in the Clyde, they're making warships. Well, we have to think of other things to do with these clever people. And when I went and spoke at the UN a couple of times, there was a guy appointed by Gorbachev and one appointed by the American president to think through a strategy of retooling factories that are currently making defence equipment for peace equipment. Useful stuff. I think that we should have someone working in the UK who's tasked with that job. So you look at everything that we're making at the moment that's military related, and you think through creatively how it could be peace related. I thought of a brilliant solution to Faslane, for instance. When finally that base is closed down and denuclearized, what do we do with it? I think we should turn it into a portal for space tourism. Okay, so instead of taking submarines out of Faslane and going around the world, you take submarine type things that shoot people into space. We could invent the technology. Why not? Blue sky's thinking. Okay? Right, so how do we solve the problem that so many people invested millions into warfare and arms trade? There is a problem, like the ISIS people are joining up because they get, I think it's several $100s a month paid. They're being paid to be recruited. The Qatar and other extremist groups in Wahhabi ideology are supporting the rise of ISIL. Well, there's a solution to that. My peace policy proposal is very, very simple. the UN, the UK, the US put a fund together for a peace force. So we say to the people of the Middle East, you can get exactly as much money as you'd get from joining that lot if you join our peace force. And what we do is we train you in protecting your village from thugs and bandits and nutters. We give you weapons, we train you in defensive, capacity, and we create a peace force, which doesn't go around smashing people's heads in and beheading people and acting like medieval barbarians, And okay, it would cost, but it wouldn't cost as much as having to fight a major war against ISIS or something. It's supporting and paying local people to actually not engage with those violent forces. Even in Afghanistan, ISIS are now recruiting, apparently, and getting some support from people in Afghanistan because they're offering them money to join them. It's like in Belfast, gangs of criminals would join up with either the Protestant or the Catholic thugs because they were paid. It was a big business, and it was supported by the drugs trade and so on. Well, if we want peace, we have to pay for peace. We have to recruit people and give them as much money. Okay, another thing. What about the European Union? That's got to be part of the mosaic of peace building. So I'm proposing the European Union, instead of doing what it's currently doing, which is it's trying to create a kind of security policy. There are people in think tanks in Europe, in Germany and France, who are trying to create European armies and European defence force, and they're trying to kind of take over the defence military capacity of Europe as a whole. And they've even created a sort of think tank for European security policy. I've been in touch with the European Union's president and head of foreign policy, suggesting that they should adopt a strategy of active mediation in conflict situations neighbouring the European Union. And I've written out a proposal for a European Union mediation service, EUMS, which could roll like tomorrow, okay, whereby each European country puts forward a panel of its most excellent mediators, professional mediators, and they're on standby whenever a conflict breaks out in a neighbouring country like Ukraine or, I don't know, Lithuania or wherever, okay. And the European Union would have written into its charter that it would immediately send in a European Union mediation service as a neutral, autonomous, professional mediation thing available to these countries, which would not be up to whoever happens to be the president or the head of foreign policy in the European Union. It would have autonomy within the European Union structure. And I first proposed this when I saw trouble brewing in Ukraine in 2008. So that's like 6 years ago. So that's another strategy of peace policy. Okay. As an educator and a scholar, I can acknowledge and bear witness that religious disputes are part of the problem in the Middle East. What we should be doing, therefore, is working with Islamic scholars and Jewish scholars and Christian scholars to encourage them in every way possible to bring out the elements of their religious faith that are most conducive to peace. This is what I try to do with my Quranic commentary. And I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that could be done. And we could work, for instance, with Muslim scholars of law, legal jurisprudence, to really be clear about why groups like ISIS are off the acceptable area of target practice for what is authentic Islam. These guys are so way off, it's just unbelievable. What I'm amazed at is that the media and our own educational authorities are not doing more to work with Islamic universities and scholarship in the Middle East. please. I'm just going to pause for a sec. So I mentioned the need for advanced Islamic scholarship and studies. I just want to say something quite interesting, which is my commentary on the Quran. I've been in touch with the Minister of Justice to make it available in the prisons of the UK, and I spoke to the head chaplain of the Islamic prisons. The Islamic prisoners inside prisons in the UK, which is quite a strong proportion of prisoners. And I'm hoping that they'll make my commentary on the Quran available to prisoners. And he also told me that they've been working on a project, I think it's called IBAN or something, which the most extreme terrorist types that are incarcerated in British prisons who've done jihad, type operations, blowing up and bombings and things, they justify their actions by appealing to certain Quranic commentaries and hadiths. They say, I'm working within the prophetic sunnah because blah, 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 quote, right? What these people have done is they've employed a team of very, very top Islamic scholars to talk to these people, go through them in detail, what they're quoting and referencing, and then come out with counter interpretations. So they produced a book, which has not been published yet. It's only in use in the prison world for now. I've said it should be published freely, which provides opposite interpretations under Islamic law of the kind of justifications they're using for things like beheadings and mass killings and killing non-combatants. So I think that work is very important, and so I'm in touch with that, and we'll be continuing to do that work. The same in Judaism. We need to work with advanced Jewish scholars in their commentaries on the Torah and the scriptures. I've worked with various rabbis over the years. Rabbi Friedlander was a good friend of mine, Rabbi Hugo Grin, and other Jewish scholars who, for some centuries, they've realised that Jewish law has to be universalised. It isn't about a particular tribe found favour with God and is the best people and therefore can kill all the other people. That's a very, very primitive level of certain type of proto-Judaism. The highest scholarship within Judaism has moved on light years from that. For example, I mentioned one who's a favourite of mine, a guy called Rabbi Elijah Ben Amozeg, 1822 to 1900, was an Italian rabbi and Kabbalist, the most respected of all Jewish scholars in Italy at the time, served as rabbi in Livorno, and he wrote this amazing work called Israel and Humanity, when he talked about Judaism in relation to Islam and Christianity and all other religions, and how we have to live together as one people on this planet. He was a great lover of Italy, and so he couched what he had to say in terms of the Italian Jewish community as being part of the universal humanity. It's our universal human essence that's important, and our particular religious way of getting to that universal consciousness is well, they're all beautiful. Every way to God is beautiful. We shouldn't be sad that this one gets it a different way. So I think one can work, but there are elements in Jewish thinking and Jewish rabbinical thinking which are much more limiting and restrictive and emphasizing the kind of the right of Jews to violence against others and so on. And I think that a peace policy has to therefore address those problems and ask people to draw on their most universal wisdom, peace elements. Another part of the work of a peace policy in the Middle East would be to work with museums. Museums are often the spaces where people go for reflection and thought. I've just been to Istanbul and went round some amazing museums there. In Israel, I've been to many great museums, including Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. I think one of the tragedies seeing these ISIS people smashing up museums in Mosul and places, we should be, the Edinburgh Museum should be twinning with museums in Syria and Iraq and so on, and doing peace exhibitions. I did a peace exhibition at a museum in Shrewsbury in 2003, and I've worked with the Bradford Museum of Peace, which is here in Britain. And I have a little peace museum at the castle where I live. And there are about 50 or so peace museums. There's one in Hiroshima, in Japan. They're scattered around the planet. And I think we should have some peace museums in the Middle East. Get museum experts, scholars. For instance, I was fascinated when I went to Istanbul. I went around amazing museums in Istanbul, archaeological museum. There's a tablet, they have the original of it, of a peace treaty between the Hittite king and the Pharaoh of Egypt. And there were two of these found. One was found in the Hittite ruins in Turkey, and one has been found in Egypt, because they had a copy each. Right? And it was on clay, it was written out, and it's the first peace treaty in history. Now that sort of thing could be the centrepiece of a touring peace exhibition that could go around the museums of the Middle East, It is possible for us to make peace. They've been doing diplomacy since the time of the ancient Hittites. And museums can play a role in promoting that. They're also places of active, memory, collective memory for communities. So I hope one day these tragic wars that are going on in the Middle East will just be in museums, and they'll look back on these as dark times, and they'll have got to a place where they can all go in, just as we do, say in the Imperial War Museum, and we can then reflect. Like in Brighton Museum the other day, I went round an exhibition for World War I, and it had a feature on 11 people from Brighton who had something to do with the war, and my mother was featured, one of the 11 people, because she was born on the 1st of January 1914, and she was a peace activist all her life. So it was really interesting going around the museum and seeing these people who stood for peace and their different histories. So I think more can be done along those lines. More generally, let me say something about education. I'm a great believer in education, as you probably gather. Look, this Middle East is full of school kids who want to go and study. They want to go to school. Peace education could be part of the curriculum, the common curriculum that they study. They could have lectures like we're doing today. They could have movies about the horrible times when they all used to kill each other, but now they've grown out of it. Bodies like UNESCO can help advise and develop curriculum for schools. I've advised with UNESCO on this. We could look at times in the past in the Middle East when Judaism, Christianity, Islam lived in harmony. Times of the greatest cultural achievements, There's another thing the UNESCO's been doing is the Silk Road, which goes through the whole region. It went from Western Turkey all the way through to China. And along it are caravanserais, which are like holiday inns from the 11th century. And some of them are still there, and they've been developed as museums. I went into one a few weeks ago. The Silk Route was a place of ideas. Knowledge was coming from China. It's where they got paper from. And it was trade. It represents the sharing of ideas. And, so school kids could go on trips and things. I'm a great believer in it's the children will make peace in this region if they're given a chance. And our duty as adults is to sort of get out of their way and create context in schools and education whereby they can do that. Okay, a practical project is a thing called Education Aid, which I dreamed up when I worked at the Institute of Education. What I'd like, imagine this, the ministers of education of the entire Middle East region come together and they say, okay, we're going to have one day a year called Education Aid Day. All the kids are not going to be forced to do lessons. They're going to come into school and do fundraising events. And simultaneously we'll be doing this in Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland, because our education ministers have agreed and sponsored it. And maybe throughout, as many countries as we can get. So everywhere, all over the world, you have fundraising events going on in schools, colleges and universities. And the money raised would go into education. So it would pay for that new roof on the school, that new extension of the library. And we'd get local businesses and stuff to sponsor it. So that would get people thinking about education, about knowledge advancement, and about learning, instead of about blowing people up. What do we do with people like Boko Haram and Taliban that go in and shoot school kids? Okay, well that's a problem, right? And that's why we simultaneously have to be arguing with their imams to tell those foot soldiers that they're wrong. So you have to be doing education at, grassroots with the kids, but also with the people pulling the strings behind the terrorist groups. I've set up a thing called IMEPSA, Islamic and Middle Eastern Peace Studies Association. There is not a single peace studies department in any Islamic or Arabic or Middle Eastern university at the moment, apart from a couple in Israel. And I think that's ridiculous. I'm working with people in Tehran. They have a museum of peace in Tehran. But I want one in Medina. I want one in Riyadh. I want one in, Aleppo and Baghdad. I want a Department of Peace Studies in at least one in every country of the Middle East. So that can encourage students and scholars to take peace seriously. And they could then visit each other's, conferences, get people doing PhDs on peace in the Sunnah of Muhammad, peace in the Shia Imams, etc., etc. Islam is supposed to be the religion of peace. So why can't we get some peace studies department? And also, there's an awful lot of money. It could fund these things. A lot of that petrol money could be used, instead of funding jihadists and beheader groups, it could be funding knowledge groups and peace studies departments. Okay, next thing. Thomas, everything you're talking about is hopeless because there's a civil war going on between Shia and Sunni, and they've been killing each other for centuries. They'll still be doing it for centuries to come. Well, I say, let's have a peace council for Shia and Sunni Muslims. We grew out of this. Catholic and Protestant used to kill each other. You wouldn't sit in a room if you were of the opposite faith. And then eventually there was a thing called ecumenism and Vatican II, and Catholics and Protestants realised they were both quite nice and they both had part of the truth. People ask me what I am. I'm a Catholic Protestant because I believe in universalism, but I also believe in protesting against injustice. I'm both, right? Well, so why can't I be a Shia and a Sunni? Why can't I be the kind of Muslim that recognises Ali's genius and also Aisha's amazing, incredible precociousness is probably the word we'd use. Why do we have to have either or? If you wanted to be a genuine Muslim scholar of wisdom, you'd surely want to put these fractured pieces together, and you'd want to learn all about the wisdom of the Shias and all the wisdom of the Sunnis. And then you could probably invite onto that council the Sufis, who've also been saying this all along. This is what the Sufi position is there should be no Shia and no Sunni, there's only wisdom. So let's set up a council. Why couldn't it be British foreign policy? If we have a Ministry of Peace Building, that's one of the first things we do, is we create a council for discussions between Shias and Sunnis and Sufis in Istanbul or somewhere, and get the dialogue going. At the moment, they're just killing each other and causing trouble, whereas actually they're all brothers and sisters who ought to be making peace together. Another project that's related to this is the Golden Gate Project, which is a sort of strategic geopolitical suggestion which has a theological root. Okay. When I went to Jerusalem, I walked around the old city, the old walls, and I noticed there's a blocked door on the eastern walls of Jerusalem, and it's been blocked up since the Ottoman Sultans blocked it up in the 1500s. Why? Well, because the legend is that that's where the Messiah's going to come through, come onto the Temple Mount, and then there'll be a judgment, and then there'll be world peace. And not until that's happened can we get world peace. Up until then, it's all chaos, mayhem, and wars. So I had this idea of sitting there thinking, why can't the world's religious leaders collectively open this gate as a symbolic thing and have an interfaith procession? So the Shias, the Sunnis, the Jews, the Christians of all denominations, everybody kind of come in a procession, like in that photo with Martin Luther King leading the Great Peace March, and there's about 10 of them abreast, right? He's there with rabbis and Christians and all that. So the world's religious leaders come in through the Golden Gate and say, we're going to suspend judgment on who was the final Messiah of history. Some of us think it was Christ, some think, I don't know, it doesn't matter really. There've been lots of avatars, there was Krishna. What we're going to do instead is we're going to show that we, the great religious leaders of the world, can make peace ourselves. And symbolically, we're going to have like a peace tent on this Dome of the Rock place. And it's a place for any pilgrim of peace that wants to come throughout the world. You don't get in unless you sign an oath of non-violence, and you go through like an airport thing, so you can't smuggle bombs on. You go in your peace tent and you have chats with pilgrims from all over the world. I think that's a lovely vision. I call it the Golden Gate Project. I've spoken to people in Israel about it. Some of them said it's a brilliant idea. It'd be great for tourism. When can we start? So, I'm working on it. The trouble is that the region is controlled by a thing called the Waqf, which is an Islamic council, and it couldn't be done without their permission. So fine, let's get permission. Let's have the debate with the scholars that run the Waqf. And I want to know why they would possibly block such a project. I don't think they would. I just haven't managed to talk to them. So anyway, there it is. Another project which I launched in Oxford and London. I gave a couple of talks last week, 2 weeks ago. You see, some people say, no, none of this will happen because the devil's actually in charge of all this chaos and mayhem. It's Satan or Lucifer or the devil's in charge here. And that's who you're up against, so just give up, right? Well, I don't think that's good enough. What I think is that a lot of the people fighting in the Middle East think the other guy's army is with the devil. They're all projecting onto the enemy as being the devil's army. So the ISIS people genuinely think they're working with God's army and the Mahdi. They're the good guys. And the reason they're cutting the heads off the Westerners is because they're with the devil. They've been brainwashed to think literally the West is Satan, right? And, the Kurdish people that are fighting them think quite sensibly, no, it's the ISIS people that are with the devil. The Jews think that Iran is with the devil. Netanyahu basically is terrified of the Iranians. They're getting bombs. They might get nuclear bombs. They're nutters. They're with the devil. His father, Netanyahu's father, wrote a history of the Spanish Inquisition and its torture of the Jews. Huge, great fat book. So he's coming from a scholarly hatred of people that are out to get the Jews. Whereas the kind of extreme, Muslim Brotherhood lot think the Jews are with the devil. So we're chasing our tails here, right? So what I've suggested is we found a new discipline. I call it comparative diabology. And it's a new branch of knowledge, which is everybody studies everybody else's devils, academically and scientifically and psychologically and from a Jungian perspective, and we work out where the shadow is and why it's moving around so much and how we can stop it. And we make peace with our own devils rather than projecting them onto the other guys. The real struggle here, the purpose of doing comparative diabology is to what Jung called the individuation of each one of us, so that we reconcile our own shadow and we no longer have to defeat the enemy because we're projecting onto them. That's going to take a while, but it's necessary and it's got to be done. Okay, another thing that we can do, and I've been in touch with the Ministry of Defence about this and had some interesting response, is a lot of the killing that's being done is being done with small arms. Modern weaponry is so sophisticated that, you can buy in a shop something that could go and slaughter 100 people in a church or a mosque or something. And these are just kids. They're 18-year-olds with these incredibly powerful weapons, right? So I suggested the following, and I wrote to the Ministry of Defence about it. I said, if every weapon that was now manufactured was given a chip electronically, and it had a code and it could be tracked exactly where it was once you've sold it through some kind of satellite system, and as long as it was in the hands of a legitimate army that's entitled to have it, it would stay functioning. But if it's captured, you disable it by switching off the chip, sort of these very advanced electronic type gun things. And apparently they're working on that. I was very interested to hear back from the MOD. It seems to me that, in the real world, we need police forces and armies and things, minimum, to have weapons. But I don't think they should be out there in the mass of the population. I don't think they should be able to get their hands on them. I don't think I should be able to walk in as an ordinary guy and buy a Kalashnikov. And I don't think I should be able to in any country. So I think, small arms control is very important. And I think technology is the way to go, and tracking. And there is now a global UN-sponsored small arms register being set up. They are working on this. But I would say it's not happening fast enough. Okay, nuclear weapons, the same. Israel has nuclear weapons. Before anyone else gets them, I think there has to be a treaty to make the Middle East a nuclear weapons-free zone. That won't happen overnight, but I think it's something to have on the table. And I think Britain and other nuclear weapons powers should be engaging in meaningful and serious, and the point you made was, do we engage in peace negotiations with integrity? I think we should be aiming towards a nuclear weapons-free world. And Britain, with all these weapons, could lead the way in pioneering discussions about that. When I was in India, I spoke to someone that knows the Prime Minister, Modi, and I wondered if India might host a revamped, nuclear weapons disarmament talks. So, and working with the IPB and International Peace Bureau and other groups, I think it's important not to lose sight of that, because at the moment the nuclear weapons powers are about to invest huge amounts of money, billions, into revamping all the weapons, like Britain's going to create new tridents and things. I think now is the time to get genuine discussions about nuclear disarmament on the planet, which can be agreed by everyone. Okay, and that would be part of the function of a Ministry of Peace Building. Now, of course, it's scary. Britain has our egos invested in this. It's our safety and defence. But I would say the greatest safety is through love and through non-violence. And the putting up of the statue of Gandhi in London yesterday was a sign of that. We would be much better as a nation if we had the courage to say, no, we actually want to give these things up. The people of Scotland want to give them up. We're going to give them up within 5 years. And we want everyone else to give them up too. And let's have some discussions about that. And move into this scary place where we rely on love and friendship and diplomacy for peace, and a Ministry of Peace Building, rather than a ministry that threatens you with instant and total annihilation, which is effectively what the Ministry of Defence does. Okay, then we have the next thing. We have to solve the puzzle of the jigsaw in the Middle East. We have to have Palestine and Israel recognising each other's statehood. Palestine, which I've travelled to and have friends there, is an ancient, culture. It has a very rich history. It's entitled to its own statehood. The British had the mandate of Palestine, and when we left, we allowed, in effect, the Jews to set up their own state. The Palestinians made a strategic error by aligning with the Arab neighbouring states to attack the newly proclaimed Israel. They invaded the day after it was proclaimed, thinking they could conquer it militarily. I think they realised they can't. Israel's too strong to conquer militarily. So it's time to change that. What I think is the Palestinians should adopt a totally non-violent campaign for statehood. That means Hamas stop firing rockets from Gaza. It means people stop coming out of tunnels with knives. If Palestinians adopted a non-violent strategy for independence, like Gandhi did, they would get it quite soon. That's my belief, and I think that Britain should be encouraging that. Also, when I talked to the head of the Palestinian delegation in London, when I used to run meetings in Parliament, he said to me, Thomas, we want to join the Commonwealth when we get independence as a state. Palestine actually, I think, should be encouraged to join the Commonwealth. And I think Commonwealth money could help rebuild the port of Gaza and the airport. And there's quite a lot of rich countries in the Commonwealth who I think would be delighted to welcome Palestine as the 54th member of the Commonwealth. I think it would be really good. The Queen can go and open the port in Gaza, and it'd be good karma, because Britain, as I say, is partly responsible for all that mess. And it'd be like delivering on some good news for mankind for a change. And then they can participate in the Commonwealth Games next time they're in Glasgow. Okay, Syria, again, we need to encourage peace talks in Syria, and one of my saddest bits of news to report on is 4 years ago I rang the Foreign Office, and I kept ringing, I kept writing, I kept emailing until they eventually had to talk to me, because I was offering them a multi-faith mediation for the Syrians in a neutral place like Geneva or something. I said, look, this Syria thing is really messy. There's Alawites who follow Shiism. There's Druze. There's Sunnis, there's Shias, there's all different kinds, there's Christians obviously. What they need is a kind of interfaith leadership conference where they all make a peace treaty, and they then go back and tell their people to put the guns down, and they agree a constitutional convention to decide the way forward for Syria in a democratic way, in a peaceful way. Anyway, and I know that could be done even now. You know, those groups that I mentioned actually all want peace, but their kind of armed factions have run away with it, and also foreign groups have now got involved, sponsoring the extreme Sunni lot, and that then became ISIS. Now, 4 years ago, before ISIS was created, I was badgering the Foreign Office to help me run that conference of mediation for interfaith leaders. And I got through finally, after several weeks of trying, to the head of Syria policy in the Foreign Office. And he told me, having listened to what he said, no, we're not going to do that, because if we do that, we'll be seen as weak, and we'll lose credibility with the extreme Sunni lot that we're trying to befriend, because our policy is regime change. We want to bring down Assad. And the hair went up on my neck. I said, am I hearing you right? You're the head of Syrian policy for the British government. On whose authority are you making those statements? Has this policy been ever agreed in Parliament? Have I ever voted for an MP that adopts this policy? And basically he said, I don't care. That's what it is. So I was appalled at the level of low-level thinking going on in the British Foreign Office around Syria. I hope that guy's sacked. Sorry, I hope that guy is sacked. And, as long gone. My suspicion is he's probably still there.
One other issue, of course, is what we see is the close relationship between MPs and the whole military-industrial complex. You see it through the privatisation process too. There's this very close relation. So I think that's another fundamental challenge to a lot of this. That their friends, often the party donors, are benefiting from large industry and so on. So that's
sure. Oh no, that's part of the problem we have to crack. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, no, I'm not a full convert to Scottish independence. Let me just clarify. My position is I'll give the UK another 5 years. No, I'm teasing too. Okay, a few other things I want to run through before we kind of finish here. The Chilcot Commission of Inquiry needs to publish, and I've been in touch with the Privy Council. It's a committee of the Privy Council, the Chilcot Commission, which is how Britain went to war in Iraq. And did we do it under false pretences, this thing about weapons of mass destruction? We, the British people, have paid this Chilcot Commission to go into it with a fine-tooth comb, and they've refused to publish. So I've written to the Privy Council under freedom of information, saying, when the Chilcot Commission was set up, was it given written terms of mandate? That's the key question. And in those written terms of mandate, was a terminus ad quem specified, i.e. a time limit? Because I find it, very odd that a commission would be set up without anything in writing. It was done at the behest of Gordon Brown, so it's probably his fault if it was. But if so, it's so incompetent I can't believe it. So why do you set up a really important commission without anything in writing? And in writing, wouldn't you surely put a by when? You'd say you've got maximum 3 years, 4 years, whatever. Because if not, if it was genuinely set up with nothing in writing and with no by when date, theoretically it doesn't have to report for another 100,000 years in law. Which means the whole thing is just a subtle way of shutting up the issue and kicking it into the long grass. And if that's true, I think it's a scandal. So I'm working on this. I'm trying to find out from the Privy Council. Now, I've had a reply saying, it isn't a commission of the Privy Council. It's a committee of Privy Council members. And therefore, we don't have to tell you the answer to your question. So the plot gets curious and curious, and now I'm in touch with MPs trying to find out. But I will find out, and I think that commission has to publish. Sooner the better, so that we can learn lessons and move on. I find it very odd that one of the attempts at peacemaking in the region is called the Quartet, which is the European Union, the US, the UN and Russia. And yet its peacemaker in the Middle East is Tony Blair, who, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the architects of this maelstrom. I mean, who is taking the mickey here? You know, it seems to me that if the Chilcot Commission reports, I think that maybe Tony Blair might want to reconsider his position as chief peacemaker in the Middle East. Okay. I also think the same about the 9/11 business, and I just, you know, I just want to flag up the fact that I've done quite a lot of research and study into the 9/11 events, and there is some very strange anomalous evidence that seems to indicate that the Twin Towers and Building 7 and the Pentagon job were not all done by 19 Al-Qaeda hijackers alone. There's some strange evidence. I don't know if you're familiar with it. A man called Griffin, who's an academic theologian, process theologian, took time out of his normal career to spend a lot of time going over all the facts and data, published some very important books saying that the official story doesn't add up. And therefore it seems that there was someone else involved. And I think, as a philosopher, that you know, we're not going to get peace in the Middle East till we really genuinely know who or what was behind 9/11. Was it what they call a false flag operation? Some elements in the US administration knew it was going to happen and let it happen because they thought they could then use it as a casus belli to attack Iraq and Afghanistan, and they already had plans in the pipeline to do that. Well, if that's true, I think the people in the Middle East and we, who got roped in on the mission, have the right to know. And I think my model for peacemaking is truth-making. So we need to find the truth about 9/11. And as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, you know, I'm in touch with people who've got bits of that jigsaw puzzle. But a lot of data's been suppressed and continues to be. I think it's got to come out. So I'm willing to work with people on that. Now, as part of the strategy for that, I think truth itself is in short supply. I think the reason the Middle East is suffering from these 1,000 wars is truth shortage. It's not economic shortage. There's no shortage of, there's a bit of shortage of water, but it's not even water shortage or food scarcity. It's truth scarcity. And I think, taking Neil's point that we should begin in Britain, I've therefore proposed a bill to Parliament, which I've written out and sent to the heads of every single political party in Britain. It's very, very simple to fix this, which is that from now on, after the bill's passed, MPs and Lords, members of the House of Parliament, and also the Scottish, Welsh and Irish Parliaments, have to tell the truth when asked on official matters of business and government by any UK citizen, either in writing or orally. And if they're shown to lie, if it can be proved they've lied, they immediately lose office. So if your MP gets up and said, no, I never gave him a backhander of 500 quid for passing that bill, and it's proved, that he did, he's out immediately, right? And I just think that if we got truth back into the corridors of power, we might begin to get a bit more of an effective peace policy. And I'm happy to share that bill and work with any MP that wants to present it, or, I'm serious about this. And every head of political party in Britain has now got a copy of that. I think academic freedom is very important in the region. And I think in Britain as well, there's a very, very sad article in this week's London Review of Books by Marina Warner, who's a scholar I have a lot of time for. She's written books about Mary Magdalene and all kinds of stuff. She was forced out of a chair at the University of Essex by bureaucratic nincompoops who seem to have taken over British universities. And the corruption that's going on is absurd. Vice Chancellor's on 250,000 quid, normal salary. I think our university sector needs a shake-up. We need to stop it being seen like a business. Education is a service. It's a right. I think we should abolish, student fees and all this kind of thing. But also then our university sector should work with the Middle Eastern university sector. And like I say, encourage peace studies departments. I know lots of students in Middle Eastern countries, they can't afford to go to college. There's a lot of corruption in academia in the Middle East. we need to, as it were, reinvent what is the purpose of higher education, and the best way we can do it is starting in our country, and then helping and working with colleagues. Personally, I'm not in favour of the academic boycott of Israel movement. I know there's arguments for it, and some people advocate that. And Stephen Hawking recently. I think the best way is to get them talking, and I'm in favour, instead of boycotting, I'm in favour of bombarding them with alternative policies. We should work with Israelis and Saudis, I mean, we should probably boycott Saudi Arabia if we're going to boycott Israel. They have a much worse record on women's rights and human rights and stuff, No, let's not boycott them. Let's bombard them with peace information and show them there is a possibility of another kind of Middle East. Let's get them working together and, make some of these things come true. Another thing that I'd like to see is there's a worrying thing in the Arab world. I mentioned anti-Semitic conspiracy theory stuff. There's also the Holocaust denier stuff going on. So the Jews, no, Auschwitz is all a sham, it didn't happen. I've been there, I've met people who lost relatives there, and, as a historian, I know that Holocaust happened. And I think Holocaust education in the Islamic and Middle Eastern world would help. A lot of the Arabs and Muslims who've been brain-fed this kind of Jewish conspiracy theory stuff don't know the Holocaust even happened. And I think that's not good. It would really help. But likewise, the Nakba, which is the Palestinian time of suffering, Jews should also know about that. That there were massacres and there was maybe a deliberate policy of moving Palestinians out, dreamed up in the Red House, as some historians have pointed out. I think it's time to lay the truth on the table, and nobody's got a monopoly of suffering here. There's also the Armenian Holocaust, which has been swept under the carpet, and Turkey needs to do some soul searching. Everybody's got skeletons in the cupboard, and if we're genuinely going to get peace and truth, we have to be prepared to face that and come through it out the other side. So look, just to finish, I think I'm an optimist. There are lots of peace groups. I'm only just one voice. There are hundreds of other people like me working on this area from the region. When I was in Turkey in August last year, I went to the International Peace Research Association. I met some incredible people doing visionary work in the Middle East. Maybe not living there, but coming, and all kinds of work. In Turkey, there are Centres for Peace Scholarship going on. The president of the European Peace Research Association is based in Istanbul. They're having a meeting in Norway in September, which I hope to go to. I met people from Israel, Palestine, Iraq. There's a peace education centre in Iraq. We should be supporting and working with these people and encouraging that research. There's a thing called the Kumi method, which is a particular dialogue project that's been going on between young Israelis and young Palestinians. I think just coming back to sort of full circle from where I started, if this wisdom tradition is embedded in that region, which I believe, then I think it's there by nature in all of us, and it's there by nature in all the inhabitants. So in a kind of Taoist sense, the Tao is already within us all. We don't actually have to do anything. We have to stop doing. So if we can stop fighting, if we can stop arguing and just begin to listen, the word Semitic, Shem, means to listen. Spirituality in the Semitic world is about listening and hearing. Islam is about hearing the word of God. Christianity is about hearing the word, and so is Judaism. So I think if we can just stop and listen, we will hear the sound of peace again. So anyway, thank you for listening to me. I seriously appreciate this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you, and I hope you've enjoyed it.